The doors were already closing when Camilla finally understood what Catherine had placed on the table. Not jewelry, not photographs, not some embarrassing private letter. 11 pages, bound with a faded blue ribbon. The final page carried a signature nobody in that room had expected to see. William didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Close every door," he said. "No document leaves this room." The guards moved instantly. One door shut. Then another. Camilla turned toward the corridor, but the last opening disappeared before she reached it. That was when Catherine said the 6 words that changed the entire night. "You activated the wrong clause, Camilla." 36 hours earlier, none of them even knew there was a clause. At least, that was what Camilla believed. It began at 6:42 on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening, when a black government car entered the private gates at Clarence House carrying a man who wasn't on the official visitor list. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a palace advisor. He was a probate solicitor named Martin Ashcombe, a man whose firm had quietly handled royal property disputes for almost 4 decades. He carried no briefcase, just a narrow red folder tucked beneath his coat. The meeting lasted 17 minutes. That sounds harmless until you learn who else was in the room. Camilla, her private secretary. 2 trustees connected to a royal residential estate, but not Charles, not William, not Anne. Most strangely of all, not Edward, even though the property being discussed had been connected to his name for more than 20 years. The official reason for the meeting was simple: an archival review. Old papers needed sorting. Several unused royal residences required updated management arrangements. Nothing dramatic. But at 7:03, Ashcombe left without the red folder. Camilla kept it. 3 minutes later, a member of staff received an instruction that made absolutely no sense. 4 sealed dispatch boxes were to be removed from a restricted storage room at Windsor before 8 the following morning. Not opened. Not catalogued. Removed. The employee asked where the boxes were going. The answer came back immediately. Temporary safekeeping. Safekeeping from whom? By midnight, Catherine had received a photograph. No message, no explanation, just one image sent from an unknown number. It showed the 4 boxes lined up beside a service lift. Each carried the same handwritten label: Ravensmere. Catherine stared at that word longer than she expected to. She'd heard it before. Everybody in the family had. Ravensmere was a sprawling country property surrounded by nearly 2,000 acres of woodland, farmland, cottages, but one detail made it different from the other royal estates. Nobody seemed to agree on who actually controlled it. Charles had used it during private retreats. Anne had hosted charity meetings there. Edward had overseen restoration work on its chapel, stables, but also an abandoned veterans' residence on the northern grounds. Camilla's family had visited several times, yet the estate had never been publicly assigned to anyone. It simply remained there, waiting. Catherine enlarged the photograph. One box had been placed backwards. The label on its lower edge was exposed. Private testamentary instructions. Do not transfer. Wait, do not transfer? Then why were all 4 boxes sitting beside a lift? Catherine called William. He didn't answer. She called again. Nothing. She tried his protection officer, but before the call connected, the unknown number sent a second photograph. This one was worse. It showed a single document lying on a desk. Most of the page was hidden beneath the red folder, but one sentence remained visible. Reclassification shall take effect upon acknowledgement by the reigning sovereign's household. Not the reigning sovereign. The sovereign's household. That tiny difference changed everything, because it meant someone might not need Charles's personal signature. They might only need an administrative acknowledgement from the right office. Guess whose office had issued one less than an hour earlier? Camilla's. Catherine finally reached William at 12:18. He was returning from an engagement when she said one word: Ravensmere. Silence. Then William asked, Who told you? Catherine looked again at the anonymous photograph. I don't know. That should have ended the call. Instead, William gave an order. Don't confront anyone. Don't call my father. Don't mention it to staff. Meet me at Kensington at 7. Why Kensington? Why not Windsor? Why not Clarence House, where the documents were? Catherine asked him. William's reply made the situation darker. Because somebody expects us to go to Windsor. At 7:10 the next morning, the 4 boxes were loaded into an unmarked vehicle. But they never reached Clarence House. Halfway across the private grounds, the driver received a change of destination. The boxes were now going to Kensington Palace. That instruction appeared to come from William's office. It didn't. Someone had copied the formatting of his official correspondence, inserted his electronic approval, then routed the order through a junior household employee who had no reason to question it. The boxes were being redirected. But by whom? At 7:26, Camilla's private secretary discovered the change. She made one phone call. The vehicle was stopped. For 9 minutes, 4 different royal offices argued over where those boxes should go. Windsor wanted them returned. Clarence House claimed authority over the review. Kensington insisted it had issued no transfer request. Then a 5th instruction appeared. Send them to the Royal Archive. That order carried Charles's initials. The boxes changed direction again. Except Charles hadn't signed anything that morning. He was still asleep when his initials started moving royal property across London. By the time Catherine reached Kensington, William was standing beside a long table covered with copies of transfer instructions. He looked furious, but not shocked. That bothered her. You knew this could happen, she said. William didn't deny it. He opened a drawer and removed a small brass key. This arrived 3 weeks after grandmother died. The key had no tag, no crest, only the letter R engraved beside the handle. Ravensmere. William had never used it. He didn't know what it opened, but the accompanying note had contained one warning. If the household begins moving the papers, do not follow the papers, follow the witness. The witness, not the solicitor, not the trustees, not Camilla. Someone else had seen the original arrangement. Someone whose name hadn't appeared anywhere. Catherine looked at the copies again. There were 2 witness lines at the bottom of the reclassification document. The first had been covered. The second was blank. They didn't have a completed agreement. They had half of one. So why was Camilla moving the boxes as though the transfer were already done? Because the signature she needed wasn't in the boxes. It was somewhere else. At 9:05, Catherine walked into a private sitting room at Windsor, carrying nothing but the anonymous photographs. Princess Anne was already there. She didn't ask why Catherine had come. She simply closed the door. You took your time, Anne said. Catherine placed the photograph of the boxes in front of her. You sent these? Anne looked at the image, but said nothing. That silence was the answer. Anne knew about the boxes. She knew about the meeting. Most importantly, she knew what Camilla was trying to activate. But Anne hadn't stopped it. Why? Because she needed Camilla to finish the attempt. The clause couldn't be exposed until someone officially invoked it. That was the trap. Anne crossed the room and opened a small cabinet behind a framed photograph of Elizabeth. Inside was a sealed cream envelope. The front carried one handwritten instruction. For Catherine, if Ravensmere is contested. Not William, not Charles, Catherine. Anne passed it to her. But before Catherine could break the seal, Anne caught her wrist. Once you read this, you cannot pretend it's a misunderstanding. That was the moment Catherine realized this wasn't about Camilla wanting a larger residence for her family. It wasn't even about the estate. It was about what came with it. Ravensmere contained several private buildings, a collection of family correspondence, historic trust rights, but also something far more dangerous. Control of a charitable foundation established under George VI. The foundation held valuable land, but its purpose was painfully specific: housing and rehabilitation for wounded military veterans. Years earlier, several buildings had been closed for renovation. The project stalled. Money remained untouched. Whoever controlled Ravensmere could relaunch the foundation, appoint trustees, approve restoration contracts, but also decide which family member became its public patron. It wasn't just property. It was influence, legacy, a permanent royal role. Now the pieces were starting to fit, almost. Catherine opened the envelope. Inside was a short letter from Elizabeth, dated 11 months before her death. It said Ravensmere had been placed under a conditional family settlement. The future beneficiary was not Charles, Edward. But there was a condition. Edward would receive full stewardship only after the reigning monarch formally confirmed that no other household had attempted to redirect the estate. That should have protected him. Instead, it created an opportunity. If Ravensmere were reclassified before that confirmation, the old settlement might be treated as inactive. Camilla hadn't tried to steal an inheritance after it was awarded. She was trying to alter the estate before Edward's rights came alive. That distinction was cold, precise, almost impossible to reverse. But Elizabeth had anticipated it. The final paragraph contained a second clause. Any unauthorized effort to redirect Ravensmere would immediately activate Edward's stewardship, without requiring approval from the reigning household. Camilla's attempt wasn't weakening Edward's claim. It was triggering it. She had activated the wrong clause. Now you understand why Catherine didn't confront her immediately. Camilla still believed she was ahead. Catherine needed her to say it publicly. She needed witnesses. She needed the red folder opened in a room where it could not disappear. If you enjoy royal dramas, where one hidden detail turns the entire story upside down, subscribe now, because the most brutal part wasn't the inheritance. It was who had quietly helped Camilla get this far. At 2:40 that afternoon, William invited Camilla to Kensington for what he described as an urgent discussion regarding Charles's schedule. Camilla agreed too quickly. She arrived at 5:55, wearing a dark green coat, carrying the red folder herself. That was the first surprise. The second came when Edward entered through another door. Camilla stopped walking. "Why is he here?" William didn't answer. Anne arrived 2 minutes later. Then the trustees. Then Martin Ashcombe, the solicitor from Clarence House. Camilla's expression changed. Not fear, calculation. She looked around the room, counted the witnesses, then placed the red folder on the table. "You've created unnecessary drama," she said. Catherine remained near the window. "Then this should be easy to clear up." Camilla opened the folder. Inside was the reclassification agreement. 11 pages. A new management structure for Ravensmere. New trustees. New residential provisions. A section allowing members of the Queen's extended family to occupy 2 cottages on the southern grounds. No names were listed, but nobody had to ask which family she meant. William turned to the final page. Charles's signature appeared above the date. The room went silent. Edward looked toward Ashcombe. The solicitor adjusted his glasses, but didn't speak. Camilla had Charles's signature, or so it appeared. William asked the only question that mattered. "When did my father sign this?" Camilla didn't blink. Before his medical appointment on Monday. William placed a second sheet beside it. Charles's official diary. Monday morning, he had been under medical supervision from 8:15 until shortly after noon. The document claimed he signed at 10:40. Camilla's private secretary stepped forward. The time may have been entered later. That explanation almost worked. Then Catherine moved away from the window. She placed a photograph on the table. It showed the signature page before the rest of the agreement had been attached. Charles's signature was real, but it belonged to a completely different document. An approval for structural repairs to Ravensmere's damaged west roof. Someone had taken the signed cover sheet, removed the repair schedule, then attached it to the reclassification agreement. No forged signature, something harder to detect. A genuine signature beneath false pages. Camilla looked at the photograph. For the first time, she seemed genuinely confused. Not caught. Confused. She turned toward Ashcombe. You said the pages had been reviewed. There it was. The contradiction nobody expected. Camilla had authorized the process, but she hadn't assembled the document. Ashcombe had. William stepped toward the solicitor. Who instructed you to replace the schedule? Ashcombe shook his head. I replaced nothing. Anne gave a bitter laugh. Then explain the staples. The original repair approval used a single brass binding in the upper left corner. The reclassification agreement had 3 modern staples. Tiny marks remained in the signature page where the brass binding had been removed. When the fighting ended, millions were dead. Ashcombe stared at them. His face lost its color. Somebody had altered the document after it left his office. But who had access? The answer came from the person nobody had been watching. One of the trustees slowly backed away from the table. His name was Sir Jonathan Vale, a longtime administrator who had overseen several of Charles's private properties. He'd approved the box transfer. He'd contacted Ashcombe. He'd also been promised the chairmanship of the newly reorganized foundation. Camilla had opened the door. Vale had tried to walk away with the entire building. He believed Edward lacked the influence to challenge him. He believed Charles's signature would silence William, but he had missed one person, Catherine. Vale turned toward the exit. William spoke without looking at him. Close every door. The guards moved. One door shut, then another. Camilla stepped toward the corridor, but the final opening disappeared before she reached it. No document leaves this room, William said. Catherine placed Elizabeth's sealed instructions beside the red folder. You activated the wrong clause, Camilla. Vale's face collapsed. He knew exactly what she meant. Camilla didn't. Not yet. Catherine read the clause aloud. The unauthorized transfer attempt triggered immediate stewardship. Edward didn't need Charles's approval anymore. He didn't need William's support. He didn't even need to wait. The moment Camilla's office issued the first reclassification acknowledgement, Edward became the legal steward of Ravensmere. Camilla had spent 36 hours trying to keep the estate away from him, but every step she took made his claim stronger. The secret meeting, the box transfer, the altered schedule, the new trustees, all of it became evidence that the trigger condition had been met. Edward said nothing. He simply looked at the old brass key in William's hand. Then Catherine delivered the final blow. The key wasn't meant for William. Elizabeth's note had told him to follow the witness, but it never said he was the beneficiary. Catherine crossed the room and placed the key in Edward's palm. It opens the chapel archive, she said. Your full appointment is inside. Edward closed his fingers around it. Camilla looked at Charles's signature page, then at the doors William had ordered closed. She had believed those doors were trapping the documents inside. They weren't. They were trapping the truth in the room, long enough for every witness to hear it. Vale was removed first. Ashcombe surrendered the red folder. The trustees were instructed not to contact any household office until the papers had been independently reviewed. But Camilla remained by the table. She looked toward Catherine. You knew. Catherine's reply was quiet. I knew you were moving boxes. I didn't know how far you were willing to go. Camilla's eyes hardened. You think this ends here? Catherine glanced at Edward, still holding the key Elizabeth had left behind. No, she said. I think this is where it begins. Outside, rain struck the palace windows. Inside, Edward opened his hand. The brass key was old, scratched, almost worthless to anyone who didn't know which door it opened. But beneath the letter R was another engraving nobody had noticed. A crown, not above the letter. Beneath it, a reminder that Ravensmere had never belonged to whoever stood closest to the throne. It belonged to whoever was trusted to protect what the throne had forgotten. So, tell me this in the comments. Was William right to close those doors? Or did Catherine just begin a family war no lock can contain? Because that night, Camilla didn't lose a house. She lost the future she thought she'd already entered.